We've reached the main speaker portion of our primary purpose speaker meeting. Our main speaker is Deanna. Come on up.
Wow. Hi, everybody. There I am. Yeah, look at that, my first time ever. My name is Deanna, and I'm an alcoholic, as if you couldn't tell. My sobriety date is, wow, I'm hearing an echo. Is that, yeah. My sobriety date is August 2nd, 2001. And yesterday, I celebrated my belly button birthday. I turned 64. Thank you. Which is pretty cool, to be 24 years sober and 64. It's pretty awesome. And congratulations to the celebrants. We had 4 years, 2 years, 1 year. I was close. 1 year and 2, and then there was a 4 and 4. Congratulations. Yeah, that's so awesome. Congratulations. So, welcome everybody, all 10 of you. So I will tell you, this is my least favorite service work that I do. Like, the love of my life is sharing with my girls one-on-one, in my home, with the big book, going through the book line by line. That is, like, sponsorship for me is the love of my life. But, you know, this is part of it, sharing our story. And I will tell you that I have always been afraid since I can ever remember. And the first drink that I ever took, for me, I was in the 7th grade, and it was like I could breathe for the first time. It was like the lights went on for the first time for me. I was actually in an art class, and I walked into the class, and I suddenly looked around and realized that there was art on the walls. And I looked at the girl next to me, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Was that there before?" And she was like, "Yeah, but you know what? I couldn't see it. I couldn't see before I had taken the drink." And what happened to me was I took the drink, and it put this negative, scary mind to sleep. And then all of a sudden, I could see around the room. It literally was like the lights went on for me. That's how alcohol was for me. And from that time in the 7th grade until I made it to the 10th grade, it was just on. By the time I was in the 10th grade, I was getting into real trouble and got kicked out of my high school about halfway through 10th grade. They found drugs and alcohol in the locker, and I was passed out on the bench, never made it out to PE at the time, and got kicked out. I was suspended prior to that for drugs, and then got kicked out, drunk, passed out, and went to bad girl school, went to night school. And that was really, really brutal, because I'm the kind of, I am the kind of girl that, you know, if I sit in 31 flavors long enough, I'm getting an ice cream. And that's just how it goes, right? And I was with a lot of kids that were doing a lot of special effects that were way out of my realm, honestly, but they were doing it, and so I was doing it. And honestly, if it would change the way that I felt, if somebody told me, you know, if you smoke a banana peel, it's going to change the way that you feel, I would have done it, and in fact did do that. So, I mean, that just shows you where my head was at. And I got kicked out of that school too, because fear has always been the common thread throughout my sobriety throughout my lifetime, prior to drinking and even during drinking. But when I was in high school, when I was at night school, bad girl school, one of the last times that I was in that classroom, the teacher came up to us. We had an assignment that we had to do, and we had to read it in front of the class, which is why it's such a miracle that I'm up here tonight, quite frankly, because he said, you know, get up and read your assignment. And I said, no, I won't do it. And I'm telling you, the fear was so great for me at that point that if he had put a gun to my head and said, if you don't get up and read this in front of the classroom, I will pull this trigger, I would have said, pull the trigger. That's how unreasonable that fear I had. What I've come to understand now, after being sober for a while, is that self-centered fear. We read about it in the book, right? And I was completely consumed with myself and what you thought about me and what you didn't think about me, and I was incapable without alcohol of overcoming that. I left school that semester and went home and told my dad. I said, I quit school, I got kicked out. And he goes, good, because I was like 14 years old, and he goes, or 13 or 14, I don't remember, whatever you are in the 10th grade. And he goes, good, because now we can start living life, right? And I was like, oh, right. Like, I thought I was going to get in trouble. No consequences, nothing. And he goes, let's go. And it was on. I'm telling you, I actually, like, we had the best time. My dad was also an alcoholic, so he did not drink, but he participated in all the other stuff. Everything that you could imagine, we had in my home. And we had parties, and there was money and fun. And we lived in San Diego. We lived on the side of a cliff in Solana Beach. And we would be out by the pool and doing all the special effects. And I don't know if it's okay to talk about that stuff up here, but that's part of my story, yeah. And so here's my sober father with a pile of cocaine and, Quaaludes and bags of marijuana and all the things. And all the kids came to our house because that was the fun place to be. And, overlooking the ocean. And you know what? We had a blast. We went to theater. We flew to San Francisco and went to parties, went to jazz clubs, did like all these things, had a fake ID at 14 years old, and just went everywhere and did everything. And you know what? There was no consequences. It was amazing. And the first time that I should have had consequences, I was coming home from work one night, and I was a serious drinker at this point, but not a daily drinker. Like, my love here. And thank you for your 10-minute share, which was so beautiful. I'm so glad to be here with you tonight. But I was coming home from a bar after work, and I'm probably 18 at this time, or maybe even 17, and I plowed through a stop sign and put 4 people, including myself, in the hospital, and came to about 2 days later from being in an alcoholic coma, and the doctor came and sat by my bed and said, young lady, do you drink like this very often? And I was like, no, of course not, And he goes, that's what I thought. He goes, because I have never seen anyone live with a blood alcohol content as high as yours. And he's like, you are very lucky. And we ended up going to court after I got out of the hospital. And he had destroyed, or my dad had finagled something and destroyed the blood evidence. So nothing happened to me. And when we walked out of the courtroom, my dad looked over at me and winked at me. And that's the way my life was, I didn't have any consequences. I wreck a car, my dad would get me a new car, or something. I would go to jail, which happened a couple of times, and my dad would take care of it. He would make a phone call or whatever. So I had no consequences as far as I was concerned. But right about this time, I was like 18 years old. I started to go to this nightclub. It's called WCPC, and it was like the club. This was like in 1978, so this is like the height of disco. So probably some of you guys know about that. And it was amazing, right? And so I ended up meeting these kids that used to dance at American Bandstand. And it was like one little clique, And I kind of befriended these guys. And, the only way you could get onto American Bandstand at the time was to be invited. And so one of the guys that I was really good friends with, the girl that he danced with, she ended up moving with her family to, Illinois, somewhere. So I got invited. And the way that worked was so we're in San Diego, we would drive down to LA to the studio, and they would do all the tapings in one weekend. So they would have 6 shows in one weekend. So you'd bring 8 sets of clothes, right? And it was really, really a blast. And the first 3 shows or the first 3 segments, you would see me and I would have, I'd be all dolled up. And then by the 4th show, I wouldn't be there, or I would be a wreck, or I'd be wearing the clothes from the previous show, which was a no-no. And this went on for about 3 or 4 months. You'd see me on the first show, you'd see me on the second show, you'd see me the first week, you'd see me the next week, you'd see me the 3rd week, maybe. I might be in the clothes that I was actually in the 2nd week. And then the 4th week, I'd be MIA because I'd be too drunk to show up. This went on for 3 months. And then one night they had a big event. It was off the studio. It was at another location. And Dick Clark and, all the peeps were there. It was really fun. And it was at night. So all the other showings, they were during the day. This was at night, and that was not good for me. And I ended up being too drunk to show up. I showed up, but it was like in front of the facility, and I was passed out, and a couple of the executives saw me, and I did not get invited back. And that was the first time that some consequence mattered to me. It was embarrassing to me. I lost my friends, you know, and that was my first geographic, unbeknownst to me at the time. It was a big geographic too. We moved 30 minutes away, my dad and I, to Hillcrest, which if you're familiar with San Diego at all, it's not really very far. But you know what? It was my first geographic. And I told my dad, I remember telling my dad, I don't want to live here anymore. I hate Solana Beach. Let's go inland, you know? And so we moved into this little shishi town, Hillcrest. And you know what? I made friends fast again, and I loved it. And I ended up being roommates with Linda Perry, who was in Four Non Blondes. I don't know if any of you guys know who that is, not that it matters, but it was just exciting all over again. You know, like Bill talks about in the book, you know, like alcohol was an important part of life, an exhilarating time for him. And, you know, he was back on top, and so was I. I got back in, I got this job at Crust Cafe, and she worked there with me, and we loved it, and it was so much fun. And this one night I was going out, and like per usual, and we found a new club and had all these friends, and there was music and people coming over to our house, and this place was just packed all the time. It was the hot spot to go to, and I would have worked there for free. I loved it so much. And so this one night I get ready and I'm going out, and the next thing I know, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm waking up in a house that I do not recognize. And I make it to work that morning somehow in the same clothes that I was in the day before. And all of a sudden, like an hour into my shift, not all of a sudden, but an hour into my shift, this woman walks in who owned that bar. And she sits down at the table in front of me, and she like goes like this for me to come over. And I sit down, and I go, what's going on? How are you? You know, can I get you a cup of coffee or whatever? And she holds up my keys to my car, which I had lost. My purse, my keys, I'm in this house I do not know, and I, you know, take off because I have no idea what's going on. She holds up my keys and she goes, do you know how I got these? And I like start laughing. I'm like, no, I have no idea. I was like, I left work last night, you know, I went to your club, and like the next thing I know, I wake up in this house and I'm like, I don't know where I am. And just then I turn around and a girl walks through the door and she's carrying my purse. And I jump up and I'm like, hey, that's my purse. And she was like, I know, I'm bringing it to you. And I was like, well, how did you even get it? She was like, you don't remember? And I said, no, I don't. And she goes, last night you were out in front of the club and you were on the ground in the middle of the street and we almost hit you. You were like literally like spread eagle on the ground and you had your purse dumped out in the middle of the street. I was looking for my keys, obviously. And she goes, so we picked you up and we threw you in the back of the car. And she was like, she hands me my purse and she's like, get your shit together, you know? Apologize for my language. Sorry, God, I'm in church. And I turn around and I look at Carla and I like start laughing and I go sit down and she was like, do you know how I got your keys last night? And I was like, no, like it's a mystery to me, like what happened last night. And I'm still laughing. And she goes, you pulled up in front of the bar drunk, pulled your car up onto the curb, almost hit like everybody in line, got out of your car, left your car running, threw the keys to the doorman and like started walking past everybody. And the doorman like grabbed you by the back of the neck. And she goes, I stopped him and took your keys and let you go inside so that I could watch you. And she goes, and then you just vanished somehow. And here you are, miraculously somehow. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow, that's so crazy. She was like, yeah, she goes, you know, she goes, I'm going to a meeting tonight. I'm actually 30 days sober. And I was like, no way, what? And she was like, yeah, she goes, would you like to come and, you know, support me? And I was like, kid, yes, I would. I would love to come support you. Like, how great is that you're sober? And she was like, yeah. She goes, I'll pick you up at 6. And I was like, cool. So she takes me to this meeting, and I have no inclination that I am being lassoed and like taken into this meeting, and she's doing this little intervention on me. I literally have no clue at all. And I'm sitting there unbeknownst to me, and I'm patting her on the leg, and it's this big round table, and this girl across from us, there was probably 50 women in this room, big, huge circle. And this girl starts sharing, and she looks over at me and she starts crying, and she goes, Deanna, I have never been so happy to see anybody in Alcoholics Anonymous before. Seeing you here, I'm like incredibly grateful. And she goes, the last time I saw you was in the back of a truck. You were passed out in Mexico. And she said, and I left you there, and I've never forgot it. And she was like crying. She's like, I'm so happy to see you. I can't believe you're here. Like, thank God. And I was like, no. I'm not here for me. Like, I'm here for her, right? But something was clicking in my mind, and I started thinking about everything that had happened and her bringing me here and last night. And I walked outside and I was looking at Carla, and I was like, Carla, do you think I'm an alcoholic? She was like, I don't know. What do you think? And I was like, I don't think I am. And she was like, okay, well, think about it. And so I left there and went to the club that night, and I told the bartender, I said, hey, you know what? I might be an alcoholic. And he goes, yeah, no shit. And I said, just give me 2 tonight. And he looks at me and he goes, I don't think that's how this works. And I was like, you let me worry about that, okay, pal? Like, you just give me the 2 drinks and then cut me off. And he was like, okay, rolling his eyes, And so, of course, he gives me the 2. And then the phenomenon of craving occurs. And I had no more intention of drinking 2 after that in a sober state of mind than I did jumping off of a building. I was serious. I was possibly an alcoholic, so I was only going to have 2, right? And then, of course, I start taking drinks off the bar and just drinking other people's drinks, because what am I going to do? Because now I lose the power to choose, right? And after that, it was really a whirlwind for me. Having this information, and now I'm about 22, 23 years old, and starting to have more consequences. And my dad starts drinking around this time. He had bought a boat, and he was going to sail it around the world, and he met these nice friends that offered him a bottle of wine, and he said, you know what, I think I do want to drink, and started drinking, and within a year had grounded his boat and turned his life completely upside down, and ended up moving to Mexico. And when he moved to Mexico, my life went downhill very quickly. When I had no one to pick up the pieces and no one to take care of me, my life went downhill very quickly, and I actually ended up homeless. I lived finally in my car, still drinking, ended up losing that job, and living in my car with my dog and my clothes in a trash bag in the back of that car that was probably worth about $50 and had rust on it. And I was taking showers at the beach, and that's how quickly my life went downhill. And I'm probably about maybe 25 by this time. It was just a couple of years, actually, that I endured that nightmare. And I had ended up going into a couple recovery houses, one called Sober Sisters, and ended up getting kicked out because I wanted to be sober, but I didn't really want to quit drinking and doing all the other things that, made me feel the way I feel. And one of the first meetings that I ever went into, I'll never forget, this guy, he said, if sticking my hands in boiling oil made me feel the way that alcohol made me feel, he said I wouldn't have any digits left. And that was true for me. I would have absolutely done the same thing, because alcohol put to sleep this negative Nancy mind that I had that was torturing me. And anyways, right around this time, I ended up, getting kicked out of Sober Sisters and I can't remember, Stepping Stones. Sorry, Sober Sisters was the meeting that we used to have to go to. It was called Stepping Stones. And somehow my dad came back when I was around 25 or something. And like I said, I was homeless. And he was like, listen, I'm going to put this gig together and you can come work for me and start driving cars. And I was like, okay, cool, because, I'm not doing very good. And he was like, yeah, okay. And one of the last weekends that I drank, I ended up, after a bender, walking into the Roundup in San Diego on a Sunday morning for the spiritual speaker meeting. I wanted the reward that you guys were getting from being sober. I just didn't know how to stop drinking. And I went to a lot of meetings, but I just didn't know how to apply it to my feet, And I was the person with the least amount of sobriety. So they brought me up on stage after it was over, and they brought up the person that had 50 years on stage, and she handed me a book, and she said, the reason I get to stand up here and hold hands with my husband and stand in the sunlight of the Spirit is because AA is the foundation of my life. And she goes, it's not my life, but it's the foundation of my life. And I was like, I want a husband. That's what I took away from what she said. She was like, I get to stand up here with my husband. I was like, I want a husband. I think that's my problem. I don't have a husband. And I was about 30 days sober, and my dad said, come with me, and we're going to take these cars up, and you can meet my business partner. And so we go up to Orange County, and I walk into this office, and my dad goes, hey, you see this guy over here? His name's Sean. He's been sober for 9 months. And I was like, oh my God, 9 months, like old timer, right? And I was like, cool. And so we start talking, and he asked me to go out to lunch. And I was like, you know what? I don't think I can really go out to lunch right now. We got to get back. I'm going to hit traffic and, all this stuff. So, but we chat for a little while longer, and he's cute. But I walk out the door, and I look at my dad, and I go, oh my God, whose car is that? It was a ZR1 Corvette, like the hottest car at the time. And this was 1986 or 1987, actually. And he goes, that guy that just asked you out. He goes, that's his car. And I went, oh my God. I said, suddenly I'm so hungry. I don't know what happened. And he was standing right behind me. And he looks over at me and he goes, how about I come take you out next weekend in San Diego? I'll take you to a meeting. And I was like, okay. So he drives up next weekend. I'm sober. He's really sober, 9 months. And we go out to this meeting at Cass Street, which is where I had originally attempted to get sober. And at the time you could smoke in the meetings, and we both smoked, and they had vending machines and Cokes and food and all this stuff. And he goes, do you want something to drink? And I was like, sure. And so then he comes back and he hands me a Diet Coke. I was like, how did you know I wanted a Diet Coke? And he goes, I didn't. And he looks down on the floor, and he had every single soda that he bought out of the vending machine, on the ground. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's so dreamy, And we ended up going to dinner that night. Oh, hello, is that for me? Tell them I'm busy, please. And we ended up going out to dinner, and we were maniacs, honestly. We were walking through La Jolla, and he was throwing money, buying me sunglasses, and we're walking across the street, going over to the beach to watch the sunset. And he goes, Deanna, the only thing wrong with my life is I have so much money and nobody to spend it on. And I was like, oh my God, pick me. I'm falling over myself. And the truth is that I needed somebody to take care of me. Truthfully, I was looking for someone to take care of me, and he was offering, and we were both this is the guy right here, right in the front row. Yeah. We were both so nuts. And I will tell you that he walked me to my car, and he said, Deanna, have you ever been out of California? And I was like, of course I have. I've been to San Francisco, on a plane. And he goes, San Francisco's in California, right? And I was like, what? You have to take a plane to get there. And he was like, actually, no, you can drive. And, he told me later, he was thinking, oh my God, she's perfect for me. And then just trying to tell you where I was at 26 years old, having drank my whole life, I was, well, anyways. So I asked him, I was like, what did you do before the car business? And he tells me he was an English professor. Well, what he was really is he had been in prison, and he was in an illegal business. And he's like, oh, I'm an English professor. If you've ever talked to him for 5 minutes, you would know how funny that is, that he would say an English professor. Anyways, so from that date, we were off to the races. It was on, I was doodling Mrs. and Mr. Lamb, on everything that I could find. And we were like literally together. Like he brought me up to Orange County. We were running and gunning. He was involved in this illegal business, and I had zero morals. I had zero understanding of God, literally no relationship with God. We're sober. He's sober now in August, celebrating a year, and I'm sober because he's sober. And I think this is like the greatest gig on earth. And my dad finds out that I'm going out with him, and he's like, oh no, 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 this is not what I signed up for. You are not going out with this man. And I was like, oh, yes, 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 I am. And he had a drawer in his house full of money that he let me have. And my dad said, listen, I need to tell you a story because you do not know who this man is. And I was like, okay, tell me. And he goes, right before he got sober, he came into the office and said, come with me, I gotta go get a couple of cars that I gave a couple of hookers the night before. And I was like, okay, go on. And he goes, and we go to this place, downtown LA, and he says, stay in the car and watch the front door. And all of a sudden he comes out and he's dragging this woman by her hair and pistol whipping her, and then takes the keys and takes off down the road, and I'm supposed to follow him. And he's like, this guy's no good. He's like, not good for you, right? You gotta call this off. And he goes, and if you don't call this off, I'm going to cancel our license. They had a business together, and he was gonna cancel this license, which my dad had gotten back into and had no money, and he did it. He canceled the license trying to stop us being together, which clearly you can see didn't work at all. And it was off to the races for us. And we were sober, and we were involved in an illegal business, and we were, in 4 years, we probably moved 8 times. We are living proof that you can be sober and do every single thing wrong and have zero spirituality and, be without drinking, right? We lied, we cheated, we stole, we were just insane. And the thing was, it didn't bother me at all. I still had no consequences. I was sober because he loved Alcoholics Anonymous, and my life got so tremendously better, and he handed me a 450 SL practically on our first date, and I saw nothing wrong with this. And we ended up moving up to Saratoga, this beautiful little town in Saratoga. I think everything is just peachy keen, but he had been in prison for 7 years prior to that. And so he was afraid, and he was every night on the balcony smoking and pacing and knowing that they were coming. And one night he comes into the bedroom and he goes, listen, I'm leaving money for you. In the morning, I'm gonna call you and tell you where I am, get a U-Haul and meet me there, wherever that is, right? Literally at midnight, and he takes off. So I pack up the car and we move to Newport Beach, which is not a stretch, but it was about 9 hours away from where we live, 9 or 10 hours driving. And we end up moving into this, honestly, this beautiful, beautiful house at the beach in Newport Beach, floor to ceiling windows, just stunning place, overlooking the ocean. But we're so at odds with each other. We are fighting all the time. He's a nervous wreck. We're involved in this illegal business, and we cannot get along. And I remember this one time he's standing in front of this window, and we're having this fight back and forth, sober. We're screaming at each other, and I'm like, I hate you. I hate you. And I pull this knife out of the drawer, and I'm like, I'm gonna kill you. And he's standing behind this window in this blue robe, and he's like the Matrix. He flips this robe up into the air, and he's walking towards me, wraps it. And I'm telling you, it was seconds. He went from there to the kitchen to where I was. It happened so fast, my mind couldn't even register. And he had that robe wrapped around his arms, and he snaps it out, that knife out of my hand, because I guess that's the way you fight in prison. So he knocks this knife out of my arm and grabs me. He loved to grab women by the hair, grabbed me by the hair and threw me in the shower, turned the shower on, and I'm crying and I'm screaming, I hate him. And this is our life. And the reason I tell you all of those things that we had and the beautiful places that we lived is because I believed with my whole heart and soul that that was gonna fix the way I felt inside. And it didn't. Here we were with what we thought was everything, and we had nothing. We literally had nothing. We had no peace. We had no serenity. We had no joy. And so finally one day he decides that he's got to get straight, right? And he calls a friend in Saratoga, And he says, you need to move to Vegas so that you can like get involved in like a legal business. You got to get clean. And we moved to Vegas, and it was a very, very difficult move for me, moving from living at the beach my whole life. And we get to Vegas, and he ends up meeting this man that's sober, been sober for like 30 years, and he owned a casino. And he helps us start this legal business, and it was amazing. And we, like, for the first time, we were legit, and he was, you know, legal. And I ended up going back to school and getting my real estate license. And I studied so hard to get that real estate license because, like, you know, I'm a high school dropout, and I hadn't been studying since I was, you know, 13, 14 years old. And I was so scared to do it. And I took that test, and I'll tell you, I was the last person in the classroom taking that test, and I prayed and I studied 10 times as hard as every single person in that room because I really, really wanted to pass. And I couldn't get the last question. And I walked outside. The teacher goes, you know, why don't you take a break and walk outside? And I went outside and I sat on the curb, and I was sitting there crying, and I was like, God, I've done everything I know how to do, and I don't know what the last answer is. And this guy walks up and he goes, what's the matter? Are you okay? And I was like, I looked up at him, I said, you know, I don't know what the last answer is. I said, I can't figure out the closing costs. And he goes, it's $528. Just like that, $528. I was like, I didn't ask you for that. He goes, I know. And I got up and I was like, are you sure? And he goes, yeah. And I went in and I wrote it down, and I passed with 98%. And, you know, I thought about that for a long time. Like, was I cheating? Like, but you know what? I was sitting on the curb praying, and God sent a lifeboat, you know, and that was like really kind of like my first experience with God, even though it's a little unusual. But literally right after that time, we ended up getting married in Las Vegas at the Little Chapel of the West. And you know what? Life was really, really good. And the day after we got married, he got indicted. What had happened was the guy that sponsored him had picked up this business that he was involved in and started doing it with his ex-partner, unbeknownst to us, right? And they came and seized all of our property. They seized all of our money. They seized cars. They seized everything. We literally were penniless. The only thing that we had was my car that was in my name, and we sold it. We bought a little house behind Arizona Charlie's that was worth about $50,000. And he didn't go to jail because there was actually, at this time, we were actually legal. And he didn't go to jail, which was truly, truly a miracle and was a God thing, you know. But the fact that we lost all of our money and all of our things, it wasn't ours anyway, and we should have, right? Like, that was our karma, truly. But we bought this little house and we went to work, and I got a job at Bally's, and he got a job selling timeshare. And we would come home to this little house, and I fixed it up, and I ripped up the carpet, and I sanded the floors, and I made it like this little cottage, this little cutie pie. And I got this job as a dealer, as a 21 dealer at Bally's. And every day I went to work, and I was so excited, and I couldn't believe that I got this job and that I was making so much money, and I was a high school dropout. And we would come home at night, and, you know, we had buckling linoleum, and I ripped it up and fixed the tile and made this like little cutie pie house. And we had down the corner from us in this little cul-de-sac, we had this jazz artist that lives down there, and he was a jazz drummer for Anita O'Day. And we would get our little lawn chairs, and we would sit outside, and we would listen to jazz under the stars for free. We did all these things for free, and we saved our money. And I didn't do my hair, and I learned how to do it myself. And I didn't do my nails. I did it, you know, I did it myself, and we saved money. We saved every dime. I would come home, and I would give him the money because he was really good with money, and I was really bad with money. And I would give him the money, and we saved, and we saved, and we lived a really great life for a really long time, until one day this girl was walking down the stairs where I worked, and she looked at me and she goes, what are you so happy about? And I was like, what am I so happy about? What are you talking about? Like, we have like this prestigious job, like I'm making $80,000 a year. I'm a high school dropout. Like, what's not to be happy about? And she was like, prestigious job? What are you talking about? She's like, we're a bunch of monkeys in here. I was like, what? Are you monkeys? She was like, yeah, we're like in monkey suits. That's what they call us. And I let her words take plant inside me. And from that day to a year later, I started to hate my life. I hated my job. I was embarrassed. I would get in my car and I would change my clothes. I let her words infiltrate my heart and destroy me, destroy my thoughts. I started to hate my husband. I couldn't believe that had to go to this job. I started to hate my house, this house that I had made myself and done my floors and painted the walls and built a garden. And I started to hate everything in my life, and I became suicidal. And one day I decided I could not take it anymore, and I was going to drive my car off of a cliff. And I grew up Catholic, and so I was actually really afraid to kill myself, but I couldn't see a way out. I couldn't see a way to change it. I couldn't see a way out. My attitude had gotten so bad. I started getting in trouble at work. I started getting warnings. Jodie Foster came and was on my game one day, and she started complaining about me, and she was like, "Oh no, what are you back here for?" She was betting $25 a hand, by the way. I was like, not that much. And and she goes, "What are you doing back here?" And I was like, "You know, Jodie, the only person at this table that actually can't leave is me." And my pit boss was standing behind me, and he like jerked me off the table, and they ended up putting me on swing shift. And that's when I really went downhill, because now I'm not sleeping anymore and I'm depressed. And I decide this one day that I'm going to drive my car off of the cliff at the Spaghetti Bowl. And I literally am sobbing and begging God to forgive me, because I know that there's no other way for me. I could not see a way out. And I'm driving around the Spaghetti Bowl, and suddenly I come out of the turn, and it was like everything was in slow motion. And when I come out of the turn, it was like there was white light all around inside my car. And I had this voice in my head that said, "Deanna, if this is as good as your life ever gets, you better start enjoying it again." And I don't know why that penetrated my soul, but it did. And I went back to work, and I started to be of service to God's kids. And I started to make every single person that sat down at my game happy that they sat there. I started to think about them instead of myself, and my life started to change again. And a year later, I got a promotion. I was in the Baccarat pit, and I was dealing to this doctor who was betting $5,000 a hand. And he said to me, we're talking and we're laughing, and he's like young, he's like 40, doctor. And he looks up at me and he goes, "Deanna, what are you doing here?" And I was like, "What am I doing here? What are you talking about? Like, I'm earning a living." And he goes, "I know that, but like, how did you end up here? Is this what you always wanted to do with your life?" And I was like, "No, but you know, I'm 34 years old. I made a couple left turns I should have made right." Like, and he goes, "You know, if money and education was not an issue for you, what would you have wanted to do?" And I said, "You know, I always wanted to be a doctor. I always wanted to be a psychiatrist," truthfully. I said, because I was 5150 a couple of times, and I ended up in mental institutions, you know? And I said, the doctors there were crazier than the patients. And I said, and that's like for real. And he goes, "You know what? You need to do that." And I go, "Oh, okay, be right with you, pal." And he goes, "How old are you?" And I said, "I'm 34. And he goes, "So you'll be 46 when you get out." And I was like, "Exactly." And he goes, "Yeah, guess what?" He goes, "You're going to be 46 anyways." He said, "Do you want to be pushing cards, or do you want to be a doctor?" And those words penetrated my soul too. And you know what? Because I had changed my life, because I had become such a good steward again of my life, when he said those words to me, I received it. And the next day I went home and I told my husband, I said, "You know what? I'm going to quit, and I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to quit my job," because for 7 years I had saved every dime that I had made. I had not spent money on anything. We had picnics in the backyard, and we went to free things, and you know, and I said, "So it's time now. You're on your feet again, and it's time. Now you can stand beside me or not." And he goes, "I'm not going to take care of somebody while they're going to school." And he goes, "So you're not quitting?" And I said, "You know what? I think you think I'm asking permission, and I'm not. I'm telling you that I'm going back to school." And I think he was like dumbfounded by that, because I always, you know, had let him make the decisions for everything. But the words that guy spoke to me penetrated my heart and my soul, and I knew I had to do it. I knew it was a God thing. And I did go back to school, and I'll tell you what, I was scared to death. And when I went in to take the exam, I was so covered in fear that it made me sick. I literally got a fever blister when I went in to take the exam, because I thought, there's no way I'm going to pass. There's no way I can. And he told me, he said, "You can take an entrance exam to get into college without a high school diploma," which I did not know. "But you can go and you can get credits and you can earn your high school diploma while you're there." And so I did that. I went and I took the entrance exam. And at the end of the class, I was waiting. All the other people had left. And the girl walked up to me and she looked at me and she goes, "Did you cheat?" And I was like, "No. Why?" And she goes, are you sure you didn't cheat? And I was like, did I pass? And she goes, yeah, you did. And I started jumping up and down. I started crying. I was like holding her hands and like jumping up and down. She could tell I was so sincere. And she goes, I need to tell you something. And I was like, I have learning disabilities. Like, I dropped out of high school in the 10th grade. Like, you don't even understand like how enormous this is for me. And she goes, you know, I've been here for like 6 years. And she goes, you passed with 100%. I've never seen anyone ever do that in 6 years that I've worked here. And because I was telling her, I was like, I thought I was stupid. I thought I couldn't, you know, and she was like, I've never seen it. And I went back to school and I studied really, really hard, and we didn't have phones or computers back then, and so I had to go to the library to like study. And but I studied for like 2 solid years. I got straight A's. And one night when I was studying, I heard Kirstie Alley on TV talking about oxygen, and somehow that like penetrated my heart, and I was off and running in a different direction. And I decided that I was going to open an oxygen bar, which had never been done. This was back in 1997. And so for a year, I put together this business proposal, and I opened the first oxygen bar in the United States. Was on Sahara and Decatur, which was the center of town at the time, and it was hugely, hugely successful. And we had lines around the door every night, and then opening night, I was on the front page of the Review Journal, and there was TV cameras and dancing girls, and it was terribly exciting. And I truly, truly believed that if I had this husband and I had a career and I carried a briefcase to work, that I would not feel the way that the girl felt that was driving that $50 car with her clothes in a trash bag, you know? And when I left that night and I went home, I knew something was wrong. I knew it didn't work. There was all this publicity, and I was doing radio shows and all this stuff, and it didn't work. And very shortly after that, I had money coming out of my ears again, and I was shopping at Neiman Marcus and all this stuff, and my personal shopper invited me out to dinner, and we went out, and she looked at me and she said, hey, you want to get a bottle of wine? And I said, you know what, I think I do. And I was 9.5 years sober at this time. I said, I think I do. And I took a drink and burnt my life to the ground. Everything that I had accomplished, everything that I did, I just got chills over my whole body. Because she looked at me and said, you want a drink? And I did not know truly that I was an alcoholic. I thought, surely there is no way that me, a girl that carries a Louis Vuitton briefcase to work and wears Gucci boots, could ever drink like that girl that was such a pig that lived in her car and took showers at the beach. I thought there was no way, but I did not understand the phenomenon of craving. I did not understand the allergy. And I gave up my life. I literally, 4 years later, burnt my life to the ground. And one night, I was extremely, extremely careful. I would wait until he went out of town on a golf trip, or I would go visit a friend in California, and I would drink. And I was very, very careful. And how I did that, I don't know. But one night, I could not manage, and I went out to the Voodoo Lounge, which I had one of my oxygen bars at the time, and walked up to the bar. I had spilled something on my shirt, and this guy said, hey, have you ever done like a shot of Jägermeister? And I was like, no. And down the hatch, which I did not do because he was at home in bed. And the next thing I knew, I was crawling on the grass in front of my house, going into my house, and I was crying, and Sean was like, what happened? And I said, someone drugged me. And he picked me up and carried me to the hospital, like what would any good alcoholic say, right? They drugged me. And he took me to the hospital, and the hospital attendant looked at him and said, you know what, we didn't find any traces of drugs in your wife's blood. And they were like, is there any way that you drank alcohol last night? And he was like, no way, my wife's sober. She's been sober for, almost 10 years. He's like, no way. And we went home, and I don't know why I told him the truth, but that night I told him the truth. I looked in his eyes, and I could see the despair and like the hopelessness and the confusion, and I told him the truth. And he packed a bag and he walked out the door. And I'll tell you what, I had never felt consequences like that in my entire life. And I was riddled with anxiety. I was absolutely tortured by what I had done. He walked out. He was the greatest thing that ever happened to me and the love of my life. And he walked out the door and did not look back. And I was out of my mind. And you know what? I wanted to stop drinking. For the first time in my life, I wanted to stop drinking, and I couldn't. I could not stop. I could not stop, and I did not draw a sober breath for several months. And I tried to make that work, and I was going to have a girlfriend move in with me, and we went out to a nightclub one night, and or she was meeting me actually at Caesars, and these two guys that were sitting next to me ended up offering me drinks per usual. And the next thing I know, I'm in an elevator over this guy's shoulder, and my girlfriend walks to the door and sees me and gets in an arm wrestling match with these guys and like gets me out of their grips, which God only knows what was going to happen to me. They were taking me up to their room at Caesars, you know, and the next day I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I could not stop. And I told one of the girls that worked for me at the time, I was like, I have got to like get back together with Sean. Like, I can't stop drinking. She goes, Deanna, Sean's never coming home. Like, he's dating someone else. Like, he has moved on. And I called him, and I'm crying, and I'm drunk, and I'm driving around in my Mercedes with a gun in the seat next to me and a bottle of gin, and I'm calling him. I literally have a loaded gun in my mouth, and I'm screaming at him, you son of a, you're dating someone else. We're not even divorced yet, and we're still married. And I said, I'm gonna kill myself. I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill her. And I'm like clanking. I go, do you hear that? I have a gun in my mouth. And he goes, pull the fucking trigger, and hung up the phone. Because you know what? I no longer resembled myself at this stage. I no longer was a woman that he knew that was sober. In 4 short years, I had completely burned my life to the ground. And the next day, I called my dad. I said, Dad, I'm on train tracks, and a train's coming, and I don't know how to stop it. And he goes, I'll be there tomorrow. And he goes, honey, you need to go back to AA. I said, Dad, I've been to AA. I was in AA for almost 10 years. And I go, AA didn't work for me. He goes, honey, you have never done AA. You have been in AA, you have never done AA. And he goes, I'll be there tomorrow. And he showed up the next day, and he took me to a meeting, and I met my sponsor at that meeting. And that was on August 2nd, 2001. And I walked up to her and I said, my life is falling apart. My husband's left. I had a business that I've destroyed. The doors are closing in like 2 months. And my life is over. And she goes, are you done drinking? And you know what? I looked at her, and I don't know why I told the truth. And I said, I don't know. And she thought about it for a second, and she looked at me, and she was like, okay. And she goes, do you want a better life? And I started sobbing. I said, I want a better life more than anything. She goes, okay, meet me at the 7 a.m. meeting tomorrow. And I went, oh, 7? Suddenly, I like cleared up there for a second. And she goes, I thought you said you were willing to do anything. And I was like, yeah, like within reason, lady. And I mean, it's not gonna be hard, is it? And I ended up going to that 7 a.m. meeting, and I went every single day, and I did not talk to Sean, and I was riddled with anxiety, being sober. I went to 3 meetings a day. I didn't go to a meeting a day. I went to 3 meetings a day, because in between those meetings, I was out of my mind with anxiety and worry at what I had done to my life. But my life started to get a little bit better because I sobered up, and I was going to meetings, and I became part of the deal. And I would get out of bed and make my bed and get on my knees and sit quiet and go to the meeting. We would go to breakfast afterwards, and then at noon, I would go to another meeting, then I'd go to another meeting after that. And, you know, my life started to get better. It started to get better like really, really fast. And Sean and I were getting separated. He was leaving me, and I told Deborah, and I was sobbing, and I was like, I do not want to get a divorce. And she goes, you go meet that man, and you be of service to him, and you do whatever he wants you to do. And I was like, I can't get a divorce, Deborah. She goes, you can do anything if you stay sober. You can walk through anything, and God's gonna walk with you. And he showed up with another girl at a Starbucks location because he was afraid to meet me, you know, alone. And we met and we talked, and he had papers, and he pushed them across to me, and we started talking for a couple of minutes. And he looks at me and he goes, what's up with you? And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, you're different. And I said, I'm sober. And he was like, so what? I'm sober. And I was like, no, like I'm really sober, like genuinely like sober. Like I'm going to meetings. I have a sponsor. I'm on my 2nd step. And I was like fired up about it. And he goes, why don't you take those papers home and think about it, and we'll talk about it later. And he called me like literally a couple hours later, and he goes, do you want to go out to dinner Friday night? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. I'm like jumping up and down. I'm crying. I called Deborah, and I go, listen, Sean just asked me to go out to dinner. Like, I think I'm going to put my marriage back together. And she goes, okay. And I go, but it's Friday night, and I had a commitment on Friday night. And she goes, no. And I went, no, what do you mean? And she was like, you got to keep your commitment. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, this is like, I got to put my marriage back together. And She goes, Deanna, if you don't stay sober, if you don't keep your commitment, like your marriage is gonna be doomed anyways, because you're gonna get drunk. And so he called on that Friday night, and I'd been crying and begging God all day to do the next right thing. And he called at 6 o'clock, and I had already decided that I was gonna tell Deborah, like, that I didn't go, and that I was gonna meet him anyways. And when he called, because I had been praying all day long, he called and he said, I'm gonna pick you up at 6. I said, I can't go. And let me tell you something, I knew in my heart and soul that if I told him that he was gonna tell me to sign the papers and leave him on the doorstep, and I told the truth anyways. And the next words that came out of his mouth, I could not believe, but he said, how about I go with you? And we ended up going to that meeting that night, and he ended up coming back into AA as a result of that, and getting a sponsor, and working the steps, and it put our marriage back together, and our business back together, and everything that I ever dreamed of having in Alcoholics Anonymous has manifested as a result of me, that moment, developing a relationship with God, which is simply that it is none of my business how it turns out. It's just my business that I do the next right thing. And we do steps in our home. And the reason that I am able, and I'm sorry, I just like ran out of time. But the reason that I get to stand here tonight with you guys in the sunlight of the Spirit and hold hands with my husband is because AA is also the foundation of my life. And I'm so grateful that you guys came and you listened. I'm sorry I didn't get sober sooner, but thank you. Thanks for listening.